Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. A weekly feature on 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com. Here's the president of the Lake George Battlefield Alliance, John Denuzzo.
Hi, everyone. This is John Denuzzo, Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance. My guest again today is Dr. Phillip Hamilton, professor of history, Christopher Newport University, Newport News, Virginia. Phil is the author of The Revolutionary War, Lives and Letters of Lucy and Henry Knox, an excellent set of letters between the two throughout the Revolution, and working on a Knox bio. Phil, this week we'd like to focus on Knox's service to the Patriot cause after the Noble Artillery Train. What are some of the highlights of that service to Washington and to the Continental Army?
Well, he fought in all of the Continental Army's major campaigns, and he was always at Washington's side throughout those campaigns. You know, for instance, he fought in the New York campaign of 1776, as well as at the battles of Trenton and Princeton. He fought in the Philadelphia campaign. He fought at Brandywine and Germantown, and then he splendidly directed the artillery at the Battle of Monmouth in 1778. So he fought in a lot of battles. But in addition to fighting, Knox proved to be splendid at logistics and at organization. For instance, in the winter of 1778 and 79, Knox organized and oversaw, he established really an artillery academy at Pluckeman, New Jersey during their winter encampment. And he essentially turned his artillery brigade into a first-rate elite artillery unit. And so he had a number of talents, and he mightily contributed to the American victory during the war.
I always have to come back to Lucy Knox. Part of the poignancy, I think, of their relationship as represented in the book you did, which recounts a number of the letters between Henry and Lucy, was that she basically had to give it all up as the daughter of a loyalist in Boston to go with Henry Knox and marry him. Was she with him during any of these military campaigns?
Well, she was with him during the quiet periods in the Army between campaigns. For instance, she was in New York City throughout June 1776 because the British were nowhere to be found. However, on July 1st, 1776, scores of British warships sailed into view of Manhattan Island. And that's when that told the Continental Army that the New York campaign was on. And Henry, he compelled his wife to leave in a very forceful manner. And there are some very vivid letters between them about this departing of her from New York City. But when there was no danger around, Henry wanted his wife by his side, and she wanted to be with him. For instance, she traveled south with the Army and with her husband during the Continental Army's march to Virginia in 1781 toward Yorktown. Now, Lucy spent the Yorktown campaign with Martha Washington at Mount Vernon while their men were busy winning the American Revolution to the south, but she always wanted to be with him. And as I just related, in New York City, she sometimes took great risks to be with him.
And were there children involved? I mean,
yeah, their first child was born right before the siege of Boston ended. She was born in late February 1776. So when Henry was off at Fort Ticonderoga, his wife was about 5-6 months pregnant. But little Lucy, as she was called, she was with the Knoxes in New York City throughout the spring of 1776. And so Lucy had to depart with her child from New York City in a very, very hurried fashion. And Lucy was none too happy about the way her husband had treated her. Apparently he yelled at her when they departed, but eventually they made up. But there were children involved, yes, indeed.
So your book that I referenced, again, presents a number of the letters between the two. What strikes you or intrigues you about the nature of the relationship that the letters represent? Yeah,
well, what doesn't intrigue me about these letters? I mean, these letters have everything historians could and should want in a series of letters. I mean, first of all, these were two people who were very much in love, and their letters have survived over not only throughout the Revolutionary War, but even afterwards. But they lived through and they participated in momentous events about which they shared with one another in very clear and accessible language. I'm struck by how easy it is to make sense of their world if you read their letters carefully. And they not only wrote about great and momentous events, but they also wrote about trivial things, which fascinates me. For instance, after Lucy left New York City in a huff in early July of '76, Henry realized that she had taken all of his cash with her. And therefore, he had to write her in rather sheepish fashion, asking if she could return some of it. So it's endlessly fascinating reading, at least to me. There were two very interesting people who lived through very interesting times.
So ultimately, the revolution ends, the Patriots win, the new United States of America begins. Washington is the first president eventually after a lot of the construction of the government itself. So what role did Knox play in the new government?
Knox, he was within the government during the so-called Confederation period. He took over from Benjamin Lincoln as the Secretary at War. That's what this position was called for. He took over from Lincoln in 1785, and he served to 1789. And so he was familiar with the duties of being Secretary of War when Washington took over. And Washington very much wanted Knox in the cabinet, not only because of their previous relationship during the Revolutionary War, but he also wanted him for his experience as War Secretary for those 4 years prior to his coming on board with the Washington administration. Now, while he was Secretary of War, Knox was very active in dealing with the frontier of America, the western frontier, and in particular in the Ohio River Valley. Knox had to organize 3 military campaigns of militia units and professional soldiers to go out to the Ohio River Valley to subdue, the Shawnee, the Miami Indians, and several other tribes along the Wabash. And those first 2 expeditions ended in failure, which greatly embarrassed Knox. And then he finally hit upon the right commander, Anthony Wayne, who did lead a successful military expedition out there. But that really consumed Knox's secretaryship throughout those years.
And so what happened to Knox after his military and government career? I know you alluded to last week that it wasn't necessarily a happy ending for him.
Knox, he began to prepare for his post-governmental career during the latter years of his secretaryship. And, I would argue that his private affairs did interfere with some of his official duties. But Knox, he gained control over approximately 4 to 5 million acres of land in the Penobscot region of Maine. And he attempted to really corner the market in land speculation. And that left him financially overextended. He also built an extraordinarily large house. His friends were telling him he was spending too much money on that. But Knox felt compelled to do that because he was still operating according to those pre-revolutionary values that great men, they demonstrated their wealth. They showed off their wealth. And that left Knox in a very bad spot when the settlers, those men who settled upon his land, those ordinary farmers who settled upon his land, they began to push back against the privileges and the haughtiness of men like Henry Knox, and Knox really wasn't prepared to deal with that, and so he, so unfortunately, the last decade of his life was a very sad affair.
So, what are the challenges you face in writing a biography of Knox? I mean, I've read a couple, one biography in particular, which I thought was pretty lackluster, truthfully. Mm-hmm. What do you find? I mean, are there firsthand sources that have not been accessed before that you can access, or how do you?
Yeah, there are a lot of his letters which are still untranscribed. That's because Knox had terrible handwriting. I mean, he had terrible handwriting. His papers, by the way, are in the Gilder Lehrman collection in the New York Historical Society, and they've been summarized, but those summaries are incomplete. But that's one of the challenges, is deciphering his scrawl, and so that's one of the challenges. But Knox, another challenge is that Knox just did so much, and he wrote so much, and so having to master, not only his correspondence, but to master, the correspondence of those who are writing to him, throughout his entire career. That is a challenge. And so, but I'm looking forward to completing this book in the next couple of years. I'm enjoying this journey through his papers, but it is a challenge just given the volume and the difficulty in reading his actual manuscripts.
Well, we thank you for the service you're providing in doing that, Phil. And again, I remind people that Phil's book, The Revolutionary War Lives and Letters of Lucy and Henry Knox, is a fascinating account. It's available on Amazon. It's also available at the Warren County Historical Society in Queensbury. And you can also look, Phil was up at Lake George back in January and did an excellent presentation, full-hour presentation at Lake George High School. And that's also available on our YouTube channel. So you want to go elsewhere on the YouTube channel, just look within the Battlefield Park Alliance. You can see the Phillip Hamilton January 13th presentation. Phil, we thank you very much for giving us such an education this week and last about Henry Knox. Best wishes on your book, all your books. And we remind people to access the books and visit our website, lakegeorgebattlefield.org. Thank you, Phillip Hamilton.
All right. Thank you, John.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. For more on this topic, check out the Lake George Battlefield Alliance podcast, a weekly feature on Lake FM 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com. For more information, go to info@lakegeorgebattlefield.org and tune in every Saturday morning for Lake George Battlefield Moments.